Welcome back to the Hype Mind. I am Bear, and Dan's joining me today, and we're going to touch on the whole idea of what equality looks like in a relationship, because that has become a very big thing, equality between men and women, but it looks very different in a relationship, and that's because, well, what you hear and what you're told and what you tend to understand and take from what you're told is actually very different than the reality of what equality looks like in a relationship, right? Because in any dynamic, there is always a leader and a follower, right? And I think that's because you can't have two leaders, so to speak, right? Most governments don't have two kings, two presidents, two rulers, or anything like that, right? There's always a dynamic where someone has more of the power and the other person respects it, right? And where the equality comes in is you can still both be competent, right? It's not that you couldn't both fill that role, or that you couldn't both meet the criteria to do that in some regards, but it's that there's still an area where someone has to take charge when there's decisions that have to be made that people don't agree on, regardless of the equality between people, and someone who has to be willing to go along and trust and respect the decision of the other person, right? So we'll get to relationships here, because I think this becomes very important, especially when people start talking about equality and they misunderstand it and they think that it has to be equal everything, right? Equal everything all the way up to power, right? Which, don't associate that word negatively, because it's not, right? Power is, in this case, we're talking about it positively. It's power that's being used for the greater good of the relationship for both parties, right? Typically the guy, the girl. Excuse me. So what I call that is the leader versus helper, right? And I use those words because it's more positive, right, than the leader versus the follower. Because a lot of times people are like, oh, well, they just seem to associate that negatively. Right. So, and in your typical relationship dynamic, the man plays the role of the leader. Or to put that more accurately, it would be the figure who's in the masculine and the figure who's in the feminine, which doesn't necessarily have to be a woman. Obviously, you see that in gay relationships. Assumes the role of the helper, right? Which isn't a bad role. It's not a role of like any less credit.
It's funny. I might view it differently, but like as the leader, like you think of Jesus Christ, right? And his life on earth. And technically he was a leader, but he said he was there to serve. So it's like you look at a leader as someone who has all the power, but it's like maybe not. Maybe he's there to just serve, and I think that's the role of the masculine, is to serve, to take care of everything, make all the hard decisions that need to be made.
And that's one of the things that gets messed up, is because I think people, they go, well, if the man is the leader, then he's automatically this, and this. But really, to be a leader is to serve your people by guiding them and taking the responsibility for the decisions you make. But you have it. Typically, you've been elected a leader, right? If you consider the situation with like voting and whatnot, you've been elected a leader for a reason, right? And so in the relationship, there's always a power dynamic going on, right? So that's really never either. Anyway, you couldn't do anything about that.
Right.
even pretended you could. Um, but in a relationship, typically the woman wants to give that role to the man, right? And now that's something
Well,
most
yeah,
people
no,
don't
and
admit.
that's super important to address, is because there's a little bit of a difference in especially sexual attraction, and I think that's important to look at, and why a man, at least in a relationship, wants to be, you know, um, wants to be independent, like in a sense, independent and competent in himself, because if you look at sexual attraction, it's different. Men usually, they'll have sexual attraction if they think their woman looks pretty or she got a good personality. But for women, what's higher up there is she's not going to be sexually attracted to him if she doesn't respect him. Like, she
Mhm.
has to respect him to some sense. And if he can't hold his own, then it's hard to respect him.
Right.
And so,
Well,
yeah, maybe looks matter, but that's down, like, you'll get to that later.
that all touches on the dynamic between people, and it brings up a good point because how do you instill what the meaning of equality in a relationship really is? How do you instill that in your relationship? That's kind of tough because the first thing you have to realize is, just like freedom isn't freedom, right? Because you could be free to eat all the food in the world, but now you're not free to, maintain a healthy weight, right? Like, freedom comes at a cost. You can either have freedom of indulgence or genuine freedom of, competency, I guess, the ability to do anything you want with your life because you know how to discipline yourself against food, right? There's two different meanings of freedom. There's also two different meanings of equality in that sense, right? There's equality where you're both being treated the same, and there's equality where you're both the same. And so you can't confuse one or the other because you really can't have both at the same time. Men and women aren't the same. When you force that, then you really destroy the dynamic between men and women, what women want in a man, what man wanted a woman, because the truth is we don't want the same thing. And that right there makes us unequal. So you have to make sure you're looking at the right um, version of equality and know which is more important to you. But in a relationship, here's the thing: is
Mhm.
to be the leader as the man, for example, and to be the helper, as I call it, or the follower as the woman. You can still be equal people, right? You can still deserve the same amount of love. You can still serve the other person with your whole self, right? Which in that case would be equal. You're both putting the same amount of effort into it. Um, and right there, the same amount of me putting my max effort into something and her equally putting her max effort, they still might not be the same max effort. I might be able to give more than her, but we're still equally putting our best in, right? So right there is an inequality. But you, as a leader and as a follower or as a helper, whatever you want to call it, you're still equal in many things. Like I said, you both deserve love and give love and serve each other as best you can. You both can be competent leaders. It's not that one couldn't lead, it's that one permits the other to lead. You can both be intelligent people. You can both be plenty of things. The equality between you guys can exist on one level, but not on effort level. It's willing to let the other person lead and you be the person who complements their decisions and trusts them.
Mhm. No, I look at it as like a business. It's like, okay, you're good at this job, you do this. Like, the relationship's going to work this way if you have this role, and you have this role. Um,
Right.
and I mean, can mostly talk to guys here. It's like, you want to, if you want the relationship to work, if you want your women to respect you, um, be competent, be independent, and she'll likely. I don't want to put emphasis on being a leader, because if you're just competent and independent, you'll naturally already be the leader, because her priority is
Be
relationship.
chosen. You'll be chosen.
Yeah. Her priority is most likely not going to be the leader. So whatever you're doing, if she likes you, she'll come along. That's what she values, the relationship. And a man's naturally more values survival of the future. Like, where is this going? How do I protect her kids,
Right.
stuff like that.
Well,
How do I
and
provide?
that's right there is another example of the genuine inequality between people, because men are motivated by different things than women. Women desire attention, they desire intimacy, right? And they prioritize that, right? What do men, prioritize first and foremost is, that freedom, um, to be able to do those survival things and whatnot that you were talking about. But
Mm-hmm.
the example of the business was really good, because there's two people in a relationship. There's you and there's the other person. And if that was a grocery store, you can't both be managers. Someone's got to be stocking shelves. Someone's got to be, um, dealing with customers. Someone's got to be at the checkout, checking people out. If you're both managers, nothing gets done in the store, right? So one of you has to assume a different role, right? And you bring up that everybody has a different job. They can both, you want to do what's best. What are you best at?
You're not, yeah.
It's not
I know, I
about
see what you're saying.
it's
You're
not
not
about
trying to demean the um the server job.
all the roles are
You're saying
important.
it's important. It needs to happen.
There's no unimportant job there.
Yeah.
Being the woman in the relationship isn't any less than being the man, or the relationship doesn't exist. You
Right.
still have to have both people to have a relationship.
Right.
But
Right.
neither
Exactly.
one
Yeah.
less
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
and
Mhm.
you're gonna do it only makes sense to work the job that you're best at, and
Right.
like you were saying, men are typically very good with or the strategy, the decision making, the organizing, right? And women can be organized too,
Mhm.
obviously, right? But a lot of times those kind of characteristics are what people choose in their leader. They're like, well, you're good at all this, we want you, right? And that's what happens, is the man gets chosen and is permitted to lead, and
Yeah.
everybody else goes with what they say, so that things work in a smooth order.
hmm Yeah. And for guys, at least, I mean, I just you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. Like, you want to assume a role of independence and
Yeah,
competency, because you're just you're just hurting the relationship if you don't do that. Like, you want respect in the relationship, right? So why not be someone worthy of respect? Why
yeah,
might not be someone who's, you'll be worthy of respect if you're competent, if you don't depend on your woman in a relationship. If you become your own leader, you'll become respect. And when you don't do that, it's like, look at it this way. It's like your woman just rapidly becoming uglier and uglier and uglier. You use sexual attraction that way. When she doesn't respect you, she's not going to want to sleep with you. So I want you to look at it that way and say it's hurting the relationship if you don't become, in a sense, the leader.
that's why it's so important to actually fill those roles. Okay, here's this position, here's this position. We both, come together to make a relationship. One of us does this and one of us does that, and that way we serve each other, and the relationship flourishes, right? So you actually have to step into that role. You can't neglect that role. And as a man, you know, I think men are to blame for everything. If something happens to your relationship, ultimately it's your fault as the man, because you should have been taking the proper direction, keeping the relationship in your frame. What have it, making sure you're prioritizing what needs to be prioritized as your mission. So 100%, you actually have to step into that role. You can't wait for someone else to push you into that role, especially as the guy. You can't wait for the woman to push you into that role. I mean, I guess that could happen, but I think a lot of times that, like you're talking about, Dan, that just ruins the sexual polarity and the relationship
Mhm.
dissipates before. So as a gentleman, you have to engage that. You have to do it quickly and properly, and make sure you're doing it from the beginning, if it's possible.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You should.
So, yeah.
Or you just hurt yourself. So that's it.
understanding that there's roles that have to be filled, and they can't be the same role. You can't both be the same role, or the relationship doesn't work.
Right. If you want a successful relationship, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So understanding that there's the leadership role, right? If that's what you want to call it, the decision making role, right? And it's not always good to be the person in the decision making role. That can be the hard part too. So don't fail to respect that. Um, and then there's the role of complementing that, right? Rich Cooper always says, um, you know, men. I think he says men should lead, and women should be a complement, right?
Mm.
That's a blessing. That's not a bad thing to be a complement to someone else's life, right? Because that just makes the two of you connect that much more and have a beautiful life. So, but yeah, that's that's our message to you. So think about that dynamic and where you should be focusing your energy, to better your relationship, and don't fail to take responsibility for that and step into that role. And if I don't close that curtain, my face is gonna get whiter than this. So peace, everybody.
Peace.